Good afternoon. We're here with Gregg Perry at the Shivers Conservation Studio. In today's interview with Gregg, we're going to hear about his training and background and how he started in the furniture making business. So, Gregg, can you tell us about your background, what you went to school for, and what influenced you in your career path?
Well, so it's long and it's storied about how Perry Furniture Makers came about. Initially, I wanted to go to med school, and I was accepted in med school in Central New Jersey at Rutgers. And there was an experimental program up in Cooper for a med tech program that segued into a medical program. And I was accepted into the program, and I was a late acceptance, and I had to get unfortunately, a rooming house in the area of Gloucester City, New Jersey. And as anyone out there knows, it's no fun being in a rooming house. You had contractors, a whole series of people sharing the whole bathroom. I bought a case of Lysol, literally cans. Every morning I aerosoled the bathtub before I got in. And when I rented the room for the week or by the month, whatever it was at this point, the mattress and box spring were on the floor, and I kept thinking, wow, could I make a bed or something to get this up off the floor? So this was kind of my impetus of really getting into furniture making. But I'm going to take you back just a tad bit more. My first instinct was living in Alloy, New Jersey, and my mother wanted a coffee table, and I thought, oh, I can make a coffee table. But keep in mind, I never had wood shop. I was always academic in high school and in college. So I made an attempt, and I made a fairly reputable little table that we call a coffee table. But fast forward into when I was in the education going to Cooper Hospital, well through the med tech program toward the MD program, which crazily enough would eventually, a few years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago, with Rowan University, they created a med school, and now it's in affiliation with Cooper, and it's come to fruition. So 30 some years later, voila, here is the med school. But nevertheless, I had this crazy idea in my mind that I was going to make a bed. So this will be a bit long-winded, but after this, my questions or answers will be short to the questions. I went to Gloucester County Community College. They had advertised in one of the freebie papers to have 2 days to learn furniture making. So that's all I need, 2 days to learn furniture. But what hit me was when I walked into their wood shop, was the waft of wood. It was pine, walnut, cherry filling the air, and I was in love and I was hooked. So what did they tell you? This is a saw, this is a drill press, this is a lathe, and that's about all I got out. But I was hooked by the smell and texture of wood, and little would I know that for the rest of my life, wood or trees would be the focal centrus of my life that controlled my world. Um, that's how I got into it. I proceeded to build the bed. It was not a good bed, and so that was the impetus of getting into furniture making. Yes, yes.
Well, that's quite a story. So, once you decided to make that switch, how did you get started or get in depth with the furniture making? Can you tell us about what courses or training you had to get into?
Well, it's probably a little more in depth than that, but so I had my education with my degrees was that of a research scientist in the food industry. So I started in Alloy, New Jersey, in a small wood shop during that time period that I was in school in Cooper. And the problem was I wasn't making enough money. Prior to that, I didn't save enough money to buy woodworking machines and tools. So I found a headhunter once I got my advanced degrees, and I was working for Alpo Pet Foods in Allentown, Pennsylvania as a research scientist. So the reason I actually chose that position was to make enough money to buy the efficient tools for my passion for woodworking, for furniture making. And I had no idea. I mean, in the beginning, I was making pine stools, heart-shaped shelves, and I actually opened up a small retail shop I rented in Mullica Hill, New Jersey, back in the early 80s. And was it successful? No. Maybe I sold one thing, and I actually closed it because I couldn't even make rent after a year. So that's where we were. But fast forward ahead, when I went up to Alpo Pet Foods for a few years, I met a client and had a relationship, and he was a relationship in the standpoint that he wanted to hire me to go to Atlanta. So he wanted to hire me to be his head chemist in his facility in Atlanta. And he said, come on down and I'll set up a wood shop in my place there, in my new 19,000 square foot flavor house. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. I can work in my field in the sciences, and I can work in my hobby. So working with this fellow at Alpo Pet Foods he was awarded a contract, and then I gave my notice to leave, and I was preparing to go down to Georgia, to Atlanta, to work with the flavor house as a chemist. And the night before, he said, I can't take you, I'm not ready. I don't have, the building isn't complete, I don't have the funding. And I said, my heart dropped. I couldn't collect unemployment, I have no job, I'm stuck up here in Pennsylvania at the time. And he said, but you can do one thing for me. He said, I need about 110 feet of lower and upper laboratory cabinetry for the chemistry lab. You need a receptionist desk. And the list went on and on of furniture. A lot of furniture I wasn't quite sure I knew how to make, because it was quite an experience. But obviously, being in the sciences, you have a logical thought process, how to break down things. I had my palate was wet a bit about furniture and how to do it. So he said, I'm going to need about 3 to 4 months. And he said, you want to make the furniture? So he said, I'll overnight you the funds tomorrow. And I came up with a number. And alas, in the small garage with virtually no tools and machinery, I started building the furniture for the laboratory in Atlanta, Georgia. So when it was done in 3 months, delivered it, I was paid. And I decided not to go down and stay with him and work as his head chemist, as tech representative for the country, and come back and actually build furniture in Pennsylvania where the house was. And essentially that's how it got started. So that little bit of money, which was considerable to me at the time, was the funding to build a wood studio and to outfit it with machinery and tools. And essentially that's how I got started in furniture making. But I knew the type of cabinetry I made for this individual, for this business, was not what I wanted to do. I was always drawn toward more the Chippendale Queen Anne style.
Wow, what an incredible beginning to your business. And that leads me to this next question. What style of furniture inspired you? And then once you were able to get this shop going there in Topton, what other styles did you create?
So we're talking from the beginning with absolutely nothing going on here, not knowing what to do with just a dearth of training. So after I got done, built the studio, it took about a year. I hired a contractor, outfitted the studio as best I knew at the time. I actually bought a bread truck and I created facades of furniture. I created a facade of a highboy and a facade of a tall case clock, and I bolted it to a bread truck. And what I would do is I would drive the truck to the local interstate and park it there all day, and then ride my bike back 6 miles. And then I would ride the bike back at the end of the day, bring the truck back, put the bike in the truck, and vice versa. So within a couple of weeks, I get a hit. So it's like putting that fishing line out. Someone with a furniture dealer out of Greenwich, Connecticut comes by and said, oh, can you make this? Can you make that for me? So I started making a line of tiger maple, high-style country furniture. And that's how it all started. And then this individual had known of 7 other individuals around the country who had, quote, mom and pop, very high-end boutiques of furniture, Dallas, Houston, Chicago, Denver, San Francisco. So by the end of a couple of weeks, I was lined up with a network to actually produce a line of furniture, which I knew very little about. And hence, this got started, and I was off and running. So now comes the chance for me to make the prototypes, looking for employees, etc., etc. And that's where the real challenges began at that point.
That's incredible. And then you mentioned that the various types of furniture that people were asking you to make, you were not always, are not necessarily sure of how to do it. So what formal training did you gain, or what did you have to do to get that knowledge?
But what I want to say initially is where we're sitting right now is the studio that when I went to that community college for that, quote, 2 nights of furniture making, I came back and I built this building back in the early 80s. And it went vacant for many years. The roof had caved in, and I moved away to Pennsylvania But coming back about 6 years ago, I put the roof back up, restored the building, and that's where we're sitting today. Behind me, a series of carving tools, a trip around the world with wood studios and wood apprenticeships, and here we are today. So and I'm sorry, let's get back to the question.
Yes, about your formal training or what additional courses you needed to take.
Well, there's a series of courses I took, but there's not much available today. So it's really by deduction and doing readings and actually taking apart pieces of furniture, antique pieces of furniture, understanding how they're made, reading up on the hand tools from the 18th century, 17th century, and understanding how furniture was made. And that's how I got into this. Being very attracted to academia, I applied that to the dexterous aspect of making furniture, and I started to build pieces of furniture in my Pennsylvania studio. Not so much here. This was very bucolic stuff. Again, shelves, steps, very basic dry sinks, basic pieces in pine. And then when I left here, somewhere in the mid-'80s, I went to Pennsylvania. Along with my new job as a research scientist, I started to encapsulate and incorporate the Queen Anne style, essentially, and then segueing into more of a Chippendale country style.
Interesting. And along those lines, what types of wood did you use, and did you have favorites to work with?
Well, in the beginning, because of the cost factor, pine was the most economical. But there's something magical about pine. People poo-poo pine, but pine is used nevertheless as a secondary wood over and over again. But the smell, the feel, the texture, running the hand plane, the shaving, emulating off of the piece of wood in the clamp, it's absolutely magical. Other woods such as walnut, cherry, mahogany, which is obviously not a domestic wood, but the most important wood, probably the wood of my life, is maple, the maple tree, tiger maple. And the tiger maple, or curled maple as it's technically called, is a mutation. We don't know if it's from a virus or from a bacterium, and it's basically taken from trunk stock. The trunk stock in a maple tree is probably from ground level to 20 feet up, where the first crotch. So the crotch is the major split of the first two branches. But that first 20 feet of trunk is where the tiger maple, predominantly the timber, comes from. So what happens is, if you can envision the cellular makeup in a tree are like straws. If you had to grip a whole handful of straws, and they're cells. And what happens is the cell walls become weakened from a bacterium or a disease or a virus. And the weight of the tree as it grows, the tree starts to compress downward. And in compressing, to have a straight straw, which we don't have any here, but if you had a drinking straw, and you pushed up, it would form loops. And those loops are very non-supportive areas of the cell wall that are very diminutive, very thin, and they become the tiger maple, or the stripe as we see it, the figure in the grain of the tiger maple tree. So predominantly tiger maple was the wood of choice for my studio when I left this studio and went to Pennsylvania for the last 27 or 28 years. Yes.
Interesting. And so the volume of wood that you must have been working with for these large jobs, where did you get that?
Back in the mid to late 80s through the 90s, furniture was hot. Country furniture was hot. I had one of three competitors, maybe four competitors in the country. So mills started cutting lumber. Mills started springing up, particularly in areas where maple trees were cut for pulping of paper. And I think a lot of the distributors that would buy wood would contract paper mills in the Sault Ste. Marie area of Michigan, upper peninsula of Michigan, upper state Pennsylvania, the far reaches of Maine, certain realms of Canada, primarily the soft maple tree. So where mills are putting through, a couple hundred, maybe thousands of trunks of maple trees to be ground up for pulp a day, they would be paid a premium if they saw a stripe in the maple trunk to hold it off for furniture making. And then the distributor would go out, purchase them, or have them shipped down to them, and then they would plank them and then dry them and then be available to me. I used to buy, according to the width sometimes. I buy like 12 inches in wide, or 1 inch stock, 14 feet long. And back in the day, in the 90s, it wouldn't be uncommon to buy $6,000 to $10,000 a truckload of tiger maple. And I rented a barn outside of town, and probably packing, truckload after truckloads, maybe 10 to 12 truckloads of tiger maple in that barn. And not just the wide stock, it would be 4x4s, 2x2s. 4x4s would be used for ball and claw legs, for chairs, and 6-quarter and 8-quarter. So just a plethora of varieties of whatever the requirements were for building high-end quality furniture from the bench.
Interesting. And
but yet, what was really only that 10% was walnut, cherry. But whatever we did back in the day was had to be figured. So you have to understand that there was figuring. There was that same genetic dysfunction, whether it's a virus or bacteria, in cherry and walnut, that you would have the curl. So Gregg Perry furniture makers specialized in curly wood, and even mahogany has curls, and plum pudding, and it has various figures. So it was always about figured wood in the studio. Yeah.
Interesting. And you alluded to your competitors. So can you expound a little bit on who was your main competition, and did you have good relationships with your competitors, or was it not so much?
Well, not so much here in the States, but I've learned a lot since I've closed the furniture making aspect of my life. I had probably four competitors at the top of the food chain here that were really at the top of bench-made furniture. So I had in my day, I had 6 craftsmen working, I trained them, and each craftsman would be at a bench like this with vices and all their own hand tools they would supply. So each craftsman would be designated to make a certain piece of furniture, a Dutch cupboard, a tall case clock, a low boy, a high boy. And so this is the caliber of individuals that we were competing with. And the hub was right here in the Northeast. There was one individual, one firm that was in, say, Ohio, in that region, but everyone else was located between Boston and, say, me in Pennsylvania or the Paoli area. So we were producing a very high-end bench-made product. We were all in competition with each other. One of the 4 makers, and we're not going to mention any of the names, but they were making a really one-off type affair. Like one type Philadelphia easy chair. They'd have clients come in. I felt that wasn't the right direction of Gregg Perry furniture makers. Our direction was to do a wholesale line, because I wasn't into retailing. That other entity was into doing retailing. They would do shows, like a Valley Forge show, and shows in Boston and DC and Richmond. And I didn't want to be a traveling dog and horse and pony type show. So I felt that if we created a line of furniture, had a hardened set of dealers around the country, mom and pop, not furniture dealers, but these were bench-made dealers that knew exactly how to sell traditional, hardcore, high-style country furniture, that this would be the way to go. So what we would actually do is, before the next cutting, just suppose we're doing long case clocks, I would say, okay, we're doing flat top clocks, tall case clocks in the Chester County style. And I'd call each of the dealers and say, how many do you want? Do you want 1, 2? It's going to take 6 months for delivery to occur. And I would keep advancing 6 months ahead in the request situation to know who wanted what. And typical, as far as tall case clocks, we're producing about 14 to 16 a year. Hard to believe that the world has changed to such a degree that we've not produced a tall case clock, or I have, because I'm the only one here, in the last 19 years. I strictly do restoration of tall case clocks, and we have one in the room right now, the last one that I've made. I've made about 375 grandfather clocks, as we call them, yes.
That's incredible.
But to get back to that, is that the ambiance or the decorum between my competition, the other 4 entities, was not good. Nobody wanted to talk. Everybody thought that this market was so tight and small that any talk would be giving away a part of their share of the market, and it was farther from the truth. This market was huge, going in from the early 90s through the end of the 90s, and we could have had a good rapport. And subsequently, when I went to Paris to experience and get a degree in furniture conservation and restoration, and I spent an extra year living with the artists of Paris, artists that do marquetry, gilding, French polishing, restoration. I learned that there are studios right next door to you down the street. You may not like the individual there. He may be extreme competition to you, but everyone works together for the sole purpose of the propagation of historic materialism to fix antique items for future generations to appreciate, to have them there for understanding. And that I realized then that that's not what we had in the States. We may have been making reproductions in the 90s, but I think the maturity level was not capable of coming together and said, we should act as a group. Other entities act as a group today. The airlines act as a group. They raise prices, they lower prices, they take things away from you as a consumer, as a group. The pharmaceutical industry does the same thing, but yet I felt my competitors didn't have the wherewithal to do it back in the 90s. We could have created our own brand or entity, and each of us did something a little bit different. One did, say, a New England style in Tiger Maple, or a Philadelphia Chester County look, or a Philadelphia Tiger Maple look that we were producing in the shop. So we were not stepping on each other's feet. Maybe in a small way we were, but essentially we weren't. So essentially, no, we weren't getting along, and it would have been great to propagate the market. So what happened is the market just died around 2000, 2001. So.
Well, how unfortunate with that. And along that same vein, did you ever have a problem with competitors trying to steal designs or encroach?
Yeah, so we're having a flat out talk of candor here. Sure, absolutely. And what I was shocked to see, probably coming into 96 and 97, actually after I've been making a certain style of tall case clock, probably for 9-10 years, I actually saw the Mennonites in Lancaster County, which they can do it cheaper than anyone because their labor rate's so low. And here I actually, from a distance at a show, I thought it was one of my clocks, or one of our clocks from our studio. This is, again, the mid to late 90s. And yet, so somebody has purchased one of my clocks, copied the design in Tiger Maple, almost copied the dial verbatim, except putting their name on the dial, or a fictitious name on the dial. So who would think Mennonites would do that? But hey, they're great consumers. They're great they propagate commercialism. They really are, contrary to what I think a lot of us believe. So it was quite disheartening to see someone, a cult or sector that gets revered like the Mennonites do this. And that's just one example. There's too many wonderful pieces that exist in museums and private collections out there that can be copied, so the sky's the limit. So why do you have to choose someone else's piece, buy it, and then knock it off? But anyway, this happens, and this is part of commercialism, and we know this, so that's
Understood.
Yeah.
And so can you also discuss what were any major drawbacks or disappointments that you encountered during the high points of your furniture making?
I think what I wasn't prepared for was I had the love of wood, and I wanted to, and just keep in mind, all of my competitors and myself, even though none of us got together and had colloquies and got together and chatted about the way things were going, what we all did was we propagated history for kids of our own, grandkids, great-grandkids. So we were propagators of history by producing historically accurate pieces, putting them out there to collectors, and as people die, they get pushed on and on. People understand and say, wow, that's a beautiful form, that's a beautiful object, beautiful wood, beautiful design. So we were all producing this kind of historical propagation, and I think that's very important for the longevity, and that was our purpose. So I can't negate anyone for that.
Excellent. And what would you consider? I think you mentioned, through the 90s that it was really a high point. But what was the pinnacle, in your opinion, of your run with furniture making?
I think the pinnacle was kind of what I would have termed a mistake. Maybe if you're spiritual, maybe it was meant to be. I was doing some demonstrations, which a lot of fellow individuals do today, today, yes, today, out on Long Island for one of the prominent interior designers on the island in the Hamptons. And they had put the advertisement out that I would be coming into the island and doing this on a Saturday or Sunday. So at that point, you could call up. They had the connections with certain publishers in New York City. So they called up. They called Colonial Homes Magazine and say, "Hey, we have a fellow, Gregg Perry. He's going to come out. He's going to do lathe demonstrations and sculpting demonstrations. And would you put it in the next issue of Colonial Homes?" So they did that, and a couple days later, I got a call in the studio in Pennsylvania, in Topton, Pennsylvania, and they said, "This is Colonial Homes. We have a state. We're opening up a new section of the magazine called Masterclass, and we've seen your work, and you have the recommendation of the designer coming from the Hamptons, and would you like to be included in an issue, I don't know, 6 or 8 months out?" I said, "Absolutely." They said, "Well, right now we're booking for a photo shoot that far out. Would you be available in a week?" And I said, "Absolutely." So they were presently using the White House photographer, and this is back in 1996. They have the White House photographer drive up from D.C. They send their editors and their camera people up from New York City. But I had to drive to D.C., and I must point out, I hadn't been to D.C. that much. Or I'm sorry, I had to drive to New York to their headquarters and show them a piece of furniture. That was the final straw that nailed this situation. So I never remember. I couldn't find the place. There's no GPS. It's end of 1995. I'm driving up. I'm circling. It was actually Hearst Publishing, the great Hearst Empire, and the Colonial Homes was under their auspices. And then I finally found a parking space and didn't know if this was the right building. So this whole affair took 2 hours, and there's no cell phones, and I asked the doorman. He says, "You got the right building." I had to pay him a $50 bill to let me take the chair up. So things are done in New York City, probably then and today and forever and ever. But so we take this chair up, and I'm on the 40th floor in the Hearst Publishing at Colonial Homes, and the editors are waiting. I'm a little bit late, and they love the chair. And so all the publishers are there, and they said, "Let's run with it." And we toasted a glass of wine in the 40th floor and said, "We'll see you tomorrow." So quite elated, I ran back, drove back to Pennsylvania, and in my house in Pennsylvania is where that shoot was done. So that was in August of '97. So they're always looking at about a year and a half, 2 years out. But I say that was the pinnacle of career to be recognized on this level, because Colonial Homes for decades, it had a run. Anyone who's anyone got the Colonial Homes magazine and to appear in the first in Masterclass. And unfortunately, I don't think the magazine lasted beyond 1999 or 2000. It finally closed. As so many things in society of history close today. I mean, our younger cultures are not so much compared about history. But I want to go back to one of the things I wasn't prepared for. I didn't get to the last answer. Was I looked at this venture as a solo artist to create great furniture that people would love and to propagate history. But what actually happened is I found I was such in high demand, I had to hire people. And the last bloody thing I wanted to do was to be an employer, believe me. And so I put it out there. I put advertisements for craftspeople. They come to my door. They made kitchen cabinets. They made boxes. So I had to train the core number of artisans and craftsmen that were working for me, such as a bench like this. And it was not easy. You get years into it. You soon learn the pitfalls, that you don't want to hire a guy that's not invested into a family life, has a couple kids and a wife. You don't want a single guy. There's a lot of thieves out there. And I would have somebody come and work for me for 6 or 9 months, and then he may have lunch in the shop. We all leave in the day, and we may have hundreds of patterns that we've had made, taken from original pieces of furniture developed through relationships with people with private collections. And here I found out this guy for the last 6 months has been taking oak tagging and doing, say, all the patterns to do a very prominent William Savory Chippendale chair. So he ends up sneaking them out. And the one day I came back from lunch early, and he has hundreds of patterns literally in oak tag, and that's hundreds or thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of my time and develop relationships, and this character is stealing stuff. So this is one of the situations that as a manager, owner, craftsman you have to deal with. So after that I learned you need to hire the guy that has a few kids and a wife that's dependent upon the paycheck, that's not willing to take the risk and go and work for somebody for some time and leave. But this story has been emulated and transferred over and over. Even from my competitors, we have shared these type of stories over the years. But I did have a run of number of employees that lasted anywhere from 8 to 9 years through the 90s. And they're very dedicated, very loyal, very good with their hands. But the things I kind of lament from the employees when it was happening is they were great wood machinists when they were with me, and they were trained that way. The kind of strange thing that would separate me from them, they didn't really care the origin, who made the piece of furniture, why was it made, how was it made. All they knew was they were presented with the wood. I would choose the wood prior to each piece being made, and they would do all the wood jointery, the assembly, and I would do all the finishing. But they didn't care what the origin was, and that always bothered me. But I had to come to the realization that I'm very different than them. I care about the historical perspective from the origin of the piece as opposed to my employees. So that's one of my greater drawbacks, was having to maintain employees. And again, we're being candid here. Is I worked side by side with these people for 12 to 14 years, and it's not fun. It wasn't fun. Listening to their problems in life, their relationship problems, and to be focused on the piece at hand, whatever it may be, and listening to 4 or 5 conversations throughout the studio in Pennsylvania. So that made life quite challenging, and it wasn't quite. It took a long time to come to grips with. But I must say, this run went on from probably 86 to 2000, so it was a good 14 years. And after a while, unfortunately, you get into that camaraderie. You know what Joe, Tom, Dick, or Harry can do. You know the skill level they are, and to ask them. And then when I closed and came back and started building very limited run, one-off, bespoke type furniture, is that there weren't those people to call and to ask and say, hey, I need you to do me 4 dovetail boxes, and here are the dimensions with sliding lids to go into the secret compartment of the secretary. There were no one to do that. I had to do it all on my own. So it made me a better craftsman, a better handmade craftsman going into the early 2000s.
That is so interesting. And we're going to wrap up this initial interview session because we know your time is very valuable. But can we meet with you again to finish up?
Absolutely. It's great sharing this adventure into furniture making, because my concern about this is it's to be lost. And there's absolutely a dearth of real information and individuals interested in this today. But maybe we'll pick up upon that in segment 2.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.